The Vast of Night is a brand new micro-budget movie available to watch on Amazon Prime, directed by Andrew Patterson, and the movie focuses on these two teenagers in a small American town in the 1950s. One is a radio presenter and the other is a phone operator, and over the course of this one night they work together to try and figure out what these strange noises are coming over the airwaves. I'm just going to cut straight to the chase on this one. I really enjoyed this movie, a lot more than I was initially expecting to, because I went into this movie not really knowing what to expect. I knew it was a micro-budget movie set in the 50s, and that was about it. But after watching this movie, I was pleasantly surprised by almost everything this movie had to offer. From the way it uses the camera in very creative and cost-effective ways, to the performances and the special effects, just everything about this movie impressed me a lot more than I was initially expecting it to. The biggest praise I can give this movie, without a doubt, is the fact that it doesn't really feel like a micro-budget film. They really have pushed their resources and their skills to the limit in this movie to make it look and feel like something that isn't as cheap as it actually is. And I find that really, really impressive, particularly what Andrew Patterson is able to do with the camera in this movie. You can tell in the film that there are a lot of long takes throughout the movie. This is very evident right from the word go, that almost, I want to say 80 or 90% of the movie is made up of long takes. And that is very evident that that is purely for production costs and time. But it works. It really does. Especially when, like, the first long take you see in the movie is the main two characters, Faye and Everett, properly getting to know each other. And it does work for an added sense of intimacy between the two characters, and you do get to know these characters a lot better during a lot of these long takes. But it just kind of works and gives the movie its own sense of personality that you might not necessarily be able to get across, especially in a directorial debut, because that's the other thing I forgot to mention, that this is Andrew Patterson's first ever feature-length movie. And it is really impressive, and I look forward to seeing what else he does in the future, because this is a really impressive directorial debut. And the amount of long takes he's allowed to get away with in this movie do emphasize his own style that he's getting off the ground right from the word go. Like right from the moment this movie starts, you can tell you are in the hands of this director's specific visual style, and he's going to maintain that throughout the whole movie. I mean, one of the best examples in this movie of how they're able to use the camera in a very creative and effective way is halfway through the film. There is basically this one long shot that goes from the phone operating building where Faye is all the way across town to wherever it is in his small Radio Shack. And that kind of thing you wouldn't usually see in not just a small budget movie, but just any movie. That kind of thing would usually be summed up in a few quick cuts. You'd cut to a few shots of Faye, then maybe some like aerial shots or something, and then it would just immediately cut to Everett doing what he's doing. But what this movie does is it instead just goes out of the door of the phone operating room and just carries on with this one meandering long take through the streets of this small little town, through this building where a basketball game is happening, and then keeps going until it reaches Everett in his Radio Shack. And I found that shot really, really quite clever, and it's also a very effective way to get across the space and location of this movie without, cutting to a load of various shots of people doing things in this town. I also really like the two lead characters in this movie as well. They work off of each other brilliantly in a few specific scenes, but for the majority of the film, you really do care for these characters, and you want them to succeed and find out what these weird noises are. And that's one thing I will say about the movie is that it constantly keeps you on your toes as to whether they actually do find out what this thing is. Just when they're getting somewhere, something may go wrong, and you are constantly engaged alongside these characters as to what the next thing could possibly be, or whether they will actually find out, what actually is going on. And I found that absolutely riveting throughout this movie. You care for these characters from the moment they're on screen, they're immediately likable, and they have their own quirks that do show up every now and then and make them characters that you do care about and that you want to see get the job done. I also really liked the score of the movie. I thought it complemented the tone of the film very well and never felt too intrusive at any point. And that's another thing. This movie knows exactly what it is and doesn't try to go beyond that. From the moment the movie starts, you can kind of tell the type of style and tone the movie is trying to go for as the camera slowly pans in on a TV that's showing this kind of Twilight Zone-esque show, and then the camera goes into the TV, therefore letting you as an audience member know that you are not watching something that's necessarily grounded in reality. You're instead watching an episode of this fictitious version of the Twilight Zone that is of a similar ilk to that. So in that sense, from the moment the movie starts, you can kind of already know subconsciously that you can kind of suspend certain bits of disbelief, which is what you need for a movie like this. This isn't one of those movies where it tells you what is supposed to be happening from the moment the movie starts. It doesn't give you a block of text saying, right, this is what's happened and this is what you need to know before going in. Instead, the movie does it very visually and sets up how the tone of the movie and how the style of the movie is going to affect how you take away the events in this film as an audience member, right from the word go, just from this simple visual cue. And it does bring that visual cue back up again in a few points throughout the movie. But that initial thing of it going through the TV, establishing that you are watching an episode of this show and not necessarily something that would be realistic, so to speak. And again, I really like that little touch to the movie. It's subtle, but it does add a lot to the movie in terms of what you as an audience member are willing to take away from it. If I had to think of a criticism with this movie, I would say that there is a scene nearer the end of the film where Faye and Everett interview this old lady, and that one scene in particular does feel like it drags on longer than any other scene. I feel like the movie has a pretty good pace to it up until that point, and then this one scene, though it is very interesting and is important to the story, I just felt like it kind of grounded to a halt once we got there. That being said, everything before that and everything after that has a good flow and good pace to it. It's just that one scene for me kind of felt a bit too slow in my opinion. Also, there are a few moments throughout the movie, and this one is a very, very small nitpick, but there are a few points throughout the film where the colour grading doesn't quite match. It'll cut from one shot to another, and the colour grading might be ever so slightly different from the previous shot it's just cut from. And it might not necessarily be noticeable to the majority of people that watch this movie, but as someone who finds colour correction a bit of a pain in the arse in the first place, something like that is rather noticeable, especially if you look at if you're looking at a specific point, like a specific thing in the shot, and then it cuts to a different angle, and that thing is a different colour, and it can just kind of be a bit disorienting a little bit. Not massively, and it's nothing to take you out of the movie by at all, but it's just something that I did notice about one or two times throughout the movie. In the end, The Vast of Night is a really enjoyable micro-budget movie that I highly recommend you watch, and I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10, leaning more towards an 8 than a 7. If you have Amazon Prime, I highly recommend you give this one a watch, because it you won't be disappointed. If you know what you're getting yourself in for, then I think you will have a blast with this movie the same way I did. So guys, that was my review of The Vast of Night. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.